Everybody, this is Brendon Lemon, and thank you for tuning into The Madness Continues, my YouTube channel, and this is another episode in our series, Talk to A, and then fill in the blank, of course. We've had Talk to a Feminist, Talk to all kinds of different stuff, and today we're talking with Kevin Bennett, who is a pro-lifer. I don't want to just pigeonhole you, though. I know you know, but that's ostensibly what started our discussion. So.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. That is completely fair enough. I went ahead and brought the whole thing up here. I am exceptionally conservative from multiple angles, and I do my best to portray that without emotion. But it's very difficult because these sort of things really get people's ire, and it's hard to address tangent positions that way. So you pointed out that, being accusatory is not a good way to go about it. And I think you're right about that. I'm learning how to do it, and I don't know how to learn without practice.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you, I think. And I first of all, I wanted to tell you again that taking the time to talk with me here in this, space was just awesome. I mean, I reach out to a lot of people whenever I end up getting in an argument or some type of discussion on Facebook. I like to reach out because,
brilliant. It's a great move, man. I was thinking I might start doing a similar thing for conversations in a story. I mean, you're going to get actual human dialogue that way. I think it's brilliant. Good thinking.
Facebook can tend to be really reductive, and there's a lot of it's not interpersonal. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in the space. So.
Right.
And rather than, keeping things there where it can become a shouting match, it basically, I want to bring it here so we can kind of have this dialogue and maybe somebody listening to it. Either we can be productive with it, or we can, someone listening to it can become productive. So
absolutely.
Hopefully that's the goal. But so what precipitated this conversation, and I'll put this in the show notes so you guys can take a look if anybody's listening, is I sort of was just going through Facebook, and Kevin had posted, I should say you shared. You didn't originally
shared, yeah.
post.
I just saw it and agreed with it.
Yeah. National Pro-Life Alliance's photo, and it says Killers in World History, and as I'm talking about it, it sounds it's hard to say because it is inflammatory, but Killers in World History, and then it has 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 going from left to right. It says Holocaust, 11 million, Genghis Khan, 40 million, U.S. abortion since 1973, 61 million, and the red bar is like the furthest one out. And ostensibly what had started us talking was I reached out and just said, what were you kind of trying to do with this? And so let's maybe start there. And I don't want our temperature to get up here because I do want to keep it kind of a calm, pretty cool discussion. And I'm saying that for me.
Right. Hey, me too. And you know what? Regardless of how it ends up going, I think that this move is exceptionally respectful and exactly the direction I want to go with these sorts of discussions, because whether or not you're on one side or the other, the fact is these are issues that affect us on the daily basis, and they need to be looked into because a lot of times the reality's marginalized out. And I think that's a big tragedy.
Got it. So you are pro-life. Obviously, I know you feel strongly about it and
absolutely
wanted to share this. So why did you want to share this necessarily? And I know sometimes I say that with the caveat that I understand that I'll share stuff on Facebook without necessarily thinking about what I'm doing necessarily.
Right.
Like I don't think about I don't put a lot of thought into
Yeah,
every one of my Facebook statuses. But
I usually don't even. I'll see a meme or something like that. I agree with it, and basically, when I'm on Facebook, I am very conservative, but I have a lot of friends who are not conservative,
Sure.
and they're going to post their perspective all the time, and that's fine and dandy. And 9 times out of 10, I've got to ignore it. Sometimes I'll see something I agree with, and I think, okay, yeah, I agree with that, and I think this is worth people thinking about. So I'll just hit post and move on with myself. And what's crazy about it, because I think it's pretty easy to explain, coming from the conservative perspective, which isn't socially in vogue right now, because of that, people see that, it's kind of like stepping on a thorn or something. What is this? And there's a knee-jerk response. And I'm not trying to do that, but I do feel like that happens almost every time. I just, regurgitate something I agree with is very telling to an underlying phenomenon. So I've decided I'm not going to just abandon that. Because if there is a phenomenon here, it needs to be addressed. I mean, granted, I've changed my perspective on things. I used to be pro-choice. I'm not pro-choice anymore. But when I was pro-choice,
Okay.
I wasn't sophisticated enough to understand the issues.
Got it. All right, let's get into that in a second then.
Okay.
So maybe go into that a little bit, talking about how your transition from pro-choice to pro-life, because I think that I came really close, and I mentioned this in the thread on Facebook. I'm open to obviously these arguments. I think the problem with an issue like this is a lot of people ideologically just bring too much to the table.
Right.
And you had mentioned that, and I think that that's where that ire comes from, and I can go into that in a minute, maybe why I was said that this was posting something like this potentially constitutes an attack against their identity, which I know is a big claim, and maybe we'll go into it in
Well, I see exactly where you're coming from. I have a different perspective, but I see where you're coming from, and I can see how that logically makes sense given the social atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, but let's get back, because I'm interested in, I mentioned Hitchens's argument that we really ought to take the interests of the unborn into account in the debate, and I think that admittedly a lot of pro-choice people really, really do not do that. And so that modified my position. I would love to hear what ended up bringing you over to the other side of the table, so to speak.
Well, when I, first was encountered the pro-choice pro-life position, I was a teenager, and as a teenager, and this is when most people encounter it. That's why I bring up, because you don't know much as a teenager either way. No matter which perspective you're going to choose, it's probably going to be uninformed. But as a teenager,
you spoke as a teenager. You thought as a teenager.
I thought as a teenager, yes. And when I became a man, I put away about half of those
teenager things.
Yes. Very good, very good. I like that. That was good. But what the kids.
You can use that in your act.
That's good. It's hard to get good biblical comedy. I need to do some of that. But the kids my age, they would believe something not because they understood it, but because this group of kids did it or that group of kids did it. And so I was pro-choice because there was a bunch of cute girls that were pro-choice. Yeah. I didn't know what it was really about. And
they had to be, because they didn't want any kids.
Right. No, especially that age. When you're in a middle school, high school, and you're having fun, you don't want to. Yeah. You don't want to stop that fun, so you're not looking at the full impact of your actions. But I took that perspective, and my dad actually worked for pro-life stuff, and I wasn't trying to rebel or anything like that. I just I didn't really care, and he kept telling me to go to these meetings for it, and I said no, and I actually jumped into pro-choice because I didn't want to go to a pro-life meeting because I thought it would be socially awkward and stupid. And so one day I just said, Dad, what? I'm not going to do it because I'm pro-choice. And he just, his head popped like a zit. He was so, what? And so he gave me some really good arguments. And I didn't have a choice because this is my dad and I live at his house. If I'm going to take this pro-choice stance, I got to defend it. So I started looking stuff up. And I couldn't defend it. The more I looked into it, the more I became pro-life. And eventually I was so it hit me so hard that I jumped into it. Now, I got into speech and debate later on. And because of that interaction before speech and debate, I started taking the conservative tack, and I would look even deeper into it. And so my views became more sophisticated than just an emotional appeal to the action itself. And I started taking into account the actual statistics and the national trends that accompany this practice. And it's led me down. I mean, the more I look into it, the more I see things about it that I couldn't have seen before. For example, if you look at a human life.
Let's go into some of this. Yeah, go ahead.
Now I was in my searchings and my readings. I was reading about how modern financial institutions in the United States will value the life of a citizen somewhere between $1 and $2 million. I don't know the exact numbers or if that's even true. But I can, look at a human's life myself.
I certainly don't value my life is certainly not valuated that high.
Well, you got to look at all the factors because we're talking from birth to death here. And if you make $20,000 a year from birth to death at 80, I mean, if that's your average, 20 times 80 is, between 1 and 2 million. So,
well, that's a good point. And really, if you're making that much, you're at least generating more value than that.
Exactly.
In the world. So that's a very good point.
Exactly. So whether or not that statistic that I came across is 100% true, I can see that people do have an economic value beyond what is immediately available to our eyes when we look at us in the present. You look at the whole picture, a sapling's not an oak tree, but a sapling could grow into a redwood, you see. So that's what I'm looking at here. And when you take that into account with the nation's economic troubles and the way things have changed, you can see that if you pull out $61 million, which is, the low end of that figure for the potentiality of the aborted kids, that economic revenue could be used to make a lot more money, to make a lot more economic security. And there's a book called Freakonomics. It's arguing from the leftist tack, but it talks about how...
Yeah, so I was going to bring that up. So Dubner and Levitt talk in that book about the fact that when abortion is legalized, the what do I want to say? The standard of living increases in especially impoverished areas, typically.
Well, they're talking about how there's a lowered amount of crime, and they're using this as a definer of standard of living increase. But there is a problem with that in that reduction of crime isn't necessarily increase in living standards. And I put for evidence of that socialist nations, where crime is essentially zero because the state's doing it all, and they don't define what they're doing as criminal. They don't.
Well, I don't know, man. I don't know if you could equate that, only because I think that, I don't know. I feel like that's tossing a rock into a bee's nest in terms of
I can see that, but
equating the two.
Consider this, in the 90s, and I've been using this a lot because when I found out about this, it blew my mind. The United States government, through the CIA, used crack communities to fund the Contra War in South America. And the journalist who broke the case, that movie, The Messenger, came out. It's an okay movie. It's not the best. But, it's based on a true event, and he died, and eventually the truth of America doing that was vetted. Now, what was happening as far as crime is concerned in these communities was mostly drug dealers. And that's what the government was supporting. So what is criminal? Is drug dealing criminal or not? The government takes both ends of that, because they're using it to facilitate social control. And I think abortion is a means to facilitate social control, especially in ethnic communities, because half of abortions in the U.S. come from 10% of the population. That's the black community. You can look that up because it's, what is it? It said that a woman who is of African-American descent is 5 times more likely to do the abortive procedure than a woman who's of Caucasian descent. And since I looked at a stat that said there were 700,000 abortions in like 2007 or 8. Mm-hmm. So if you multiply, 10% of 700,000 is 70,000, multiply that by 5, 350,000. That's half right down the middle. And there's definitely something going on there that is more than just the woman's choice issue. So that also is something to consider.
And I should tell anybody who's listening to this, Kevin cited these in this Facebook thread as well. So he's not just talking out of his ass or anything.
Trying not to, but my face. There's this rough tension there.
Well, this is very interesting. I might be inclined to agree with you that I think there's probably more going on related to the abortion debate than simply a women's issue, and I think that I think wise liberals, and if I can laud myself and lump myself into that group for a moment, I think wise liberals are beginning to, recognize that conservatives who have been saying that things that liberals have been labeling racial or gender issues are actually not those things. I think that there's a point to that, and wise liberals are starting to realize it, which is that there's more going on there than just that. But to draw back what you just said into our sort of the point here is, it seems to me like your argument against abortion comes predominantly from an economic a pragmatic economic standpoint. You're looking at the loss of productivity potentially for all of those types of people. But my bet is that that's not your only position. My bet also is that you probably feel morally that it's reprehensible, and I know that because you're a Christian as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that because what I said earlier with the sapling and the redwood, the human potentiality of a single individual cannot be fully understood, even by people who have the advantage of years to look back on how everything's interrelated. I mean, it can be partially understood with experience, but the fact is, everything we do influences other people in ways that we have no way of even knowing. So I think to cut that life short because you were young and a teenager and acting like a teenager and thinking as a teenager and it was inconvenient to reap the consequences of what happened to you, I think that fundamentally shortchanges the human race.
Well, but what about, so here's an interesting, I think, and this is where we start disagreeing, is that I feel like there is a difference between the potential for, a human being. So part of the argument that we had was the difference between where we felt that, when a fetus, when a blastocyst, when conception, or equals people, or equals a person. And the point that you made is that when people use terms like fetus, or when they use terms like the unborn, or things like this, they're essentially dodging or trying to, use some kind of space in order to not absorb the idea that we're killing people, basically.
Yeah,
But I disagree with that because I feel like there is a difference between a blastocyst, even a fetus that is in the early stages of development, and a human being. I mean, it simply is not the same, from my perspective. It's simply not the same thing. I mean, they're two different concepts. And I mean, I might be inclined to agree with you when we talk about things like partial birth abortion, which is horrific to even think about.
Yeah.
But things like that, and part of that issue that I raised, that I would like to hear your response to, sort of in a greater way than on Facebook, simply because it's so limiting, is when I raised the concept of miscarriage and manslaughter. So if we can agree, and this is part of the issue, because I've done stand-up on this issue.
Oh, yeah. That's the beauty of stand-up. I mean, you can actually address things socially that you can't do regularly. I love that about it.
Yeah, so for example, just to cite the argument was that if we agree that a human being begins when sperm meets egg, then a miscarriage could be tantamount to manslaughter, because manslaughter in a legal definition is you killed someone even though you didn't have the intention or purpose to do it, which you correctly pointed out is the difference between manslaughter and murder. So the joke that I ended up telling on stage was I said something like, the always progressive state of Missouri recently passed a law that said that, birth begins or life begins at conception when sperm meets egg, and that has all the rights of a person. And so I think my joke was something, and this is like, I haven't done this in years, but I think my joke was something like, which is great because I can finally bring that involuntary imprisonment case against my mother that I've always wanted to bring. Because
that's good. That's fun.
And I think I said something like, the real crux of the joke was, but now when a woman has a miscarriage, it's not just a tragedy, it's also a felony case of manslaughter. Because if her body, and it should be, because if her body didn't want to carry that baby to term, it should have thought about that before it got pregnant.
Okay, that's funny. I can see, it's a joke. I think it's a keeper. There's definitely your constituency's going to like it. I think there's a couple of things to look into here. Cool. When we look at a human being as a fertilized ovum, a blastocyst, or a fetus, rather than a human being, we're looking at it from a perspective that automatically assumes the life that we experience physically is the extent of life perpetually. And what I'm saying here is
okay, explain.
From the Christian perspective, the universe we live in is, now this isn't a one-to-one comparison, this is just to help you understand what the scripture says about it.
Sure.
The universe we live in is like a simulation compared to the reality. It's like we're in the real world, but our real world is just Grand Theft Auto, and when we die, we're in the actual real world where the people who programmed Grand Theft Auto came from. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
Because we are in this world.
By the way, I would be fucking terrified to be in a game of Grand Theft Auto.
Well, I know, but think about it. We're worse. I mean, they ain't got no Nazis in Grand Theft Auto. You know, it's for real. It's some scary shit.
Something. I feel like Rockstar should look into that.
Oh, that could be hilarious. Grand Theft Auto, Fräulein. We steal your cars and your family. Yeah, those are the real thugs.
It would be like Große Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto. If your name is Otto, we will steal you and ride you around like a vehicle. That's it. But no. So you look at our universe.
Große
then.
Theft Auto. Sorry, go ahead.
I love puns. Puns are the best. You look at our universe then not as the end all of existence, but it is itself a womb. We're in a womb right now, and when we die, we're born into the real reality. So if you look at the soul like that, then ourselves, we're a fetus in adulthood, you see. So the difference in age and size, really, if you're going to define that, you've either got to assume that human beings don't have this thing called a soul and that our intelligence and our conscience is an illusion and not real, or that is real. Now, if it is real, it follows that size and age do not define what a human being is, because what defines a human being is, in fact, the soul, and the moment of conception is where a soul is applied to the matter in a sperm and an ovum. So that's where that perspective comes from.
So we are essentially fetuses in a womb. This is why I've always felt like a giant baby.
Yeah. All in all, you're just a kid and your mom or something. You know, the universe is the universal. Don't quit
your day job there, Kevin.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I've actually got a joke on that, except the punchline is, all in all, you're just another dick in the mall. It's pretty fun.
Hashtag jokes without punchlines without setups.
Yeah,
that's what it'll be like. Doctors Without Borders, except
yeah,
it'll just be punchlines out in the world.
I said that's what she said.
Yeah, oh my god, that's so funny. That's just for us comics.
Yeah, that's just for
well, let me draw this back though. So all right, so this is maybe, and this is the root potentially of this fundamental disagreement, because I could believe that a soul exists, but where does it exist? I mean, what evidence is there that it exists? I've heard, 21 grams. I've heard these different kinds of things. I'm really not convinced by that.
That's understandable. That's a valid objection. It's the same objection I've had people make about folks that are comatose or have a mental retardation of some caliber, in that they act primarily instinctually and it seems impossible to teach them. But
because this is a good argument, because think about someone who is in a Phineas Gage, for example, who got a bar through his skull and then became a completely different person. If you exist on the outside of the Grand Theft Auto game, when you die potentially and you go to whatever the real world ends up being, which I sincerely hope is not, by the way, the world from the Matrix. That would be super disappointing.
That would blow dogs for quarters, to coin the Rock City. Yeah, that would not be fun. That would be
really lame. That would be so lame. But
that would suck. Wachowskis, you knew? Damn it, Larry Lana.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. I'm trying so hard not to go off on a tangent about those weird people. But
I know. Well, they what's the word? They Shyamalan'd on us.
They totally did.
They did.
They pulled a huge Shyamalan.
They're like, ooh, you think we're good directors? Nope.
Oh, God. That's pretty Shyamalame of them. But so let's get back, because what the argument that makes sense to me, and that has been repeated by Sam Harris, for example, is what happens to those people? I mean, what personality is it that those people have? Because they in our world are completely different when they have some type of brain activity. I mean, the mind is the brain, it seems to be, because of evidence such as Phineas Gage. If you go to an afterlife, who would you be? And so I think that does demand some kind of answer on the question of a soul.
There's a number of different ways to look at it. If a child is killed before they're 3 years old, they don't have a lot of mental development that is sophisticated, but according to the Christian tradition, they would be, saved eternally because they had not yet come to the age of, now I'm forgetting the word, the age of self-realization. The point, it's different for everybody, where you are able to, in reality, distinguish between right and wrong. There's two kinds of lack of knowledge. You got ignorance, which is willingly ignoring something, and you've got nescience, which is you don't know something because the knowledge is not available to you. And there is a point at which human beings transcend from nescience to ignorance because they've got the ability to understand, but they haven't. But they will maybe willfully don't. Whereas someone who never makes that transition and lives in perpetual nescience, technically they can't really do anything right or wrong because they don't have the ability to understand that. Now, people say the animals aren't going to be in heaven. I don't think that's true. I think we're going to have animals up there. I think that's why God made them, and there's definitely no indication anywhere in Scripture that that's not the case. Plus, whenever heaven is depicted, there are always animals depicted with it. So I think that the question is made a little bit too complex because we have changed in our modern world how we understand things like spirit, body, mind, soul. I used to understand spirit as interchangeable with soul. Recently, I've come to look at spirit as emotion. The soul is the interface program between this physical body and the real world. The mind is the cockpit from which the soul pilots this fleshy machine we drive. And the body is just that. It's a fleshy machine. It's not it's not going to come with us into the next world, just like the digital body of a GTA person wouldn't come into our world when he died. Now, granted, it's not a one-to-one comparison because when people die in GTA, they don't pop up. They don't
pop up in real life.
Which, if they did, what a sci-fi movie that would be. That would be.
I think it's like the opposite of the movie Tron. I think is what you're describing.
Yeah, kind of. It really is. That is sort of. And that's what's interesting about that movie is that if
the Sci-Fi Channel made that movie, it would just be called Video Game Life. It would just straightforward. They wouldn't even sugarcoat it. So. But still, I mean, look, I appreciate what you're saying, but I still, is there an account for a soul somewhere in life that we can point to? Because this is part of the thing I think that is divisive between the two parties at the table. So, what originally sort of got this discussion going was the fact that I ended up saying that what you posted was inflammatory in a way because and I'm not saying you intended it only to be that way, but it was inflammatory in a way because someone who is pro-choice, who thinks of themselves as a pro-choice person, would see that and I think react in the way that a lot of people did on your post. And you really did draw their ire. And I mean, I have to say, it's ridiculous for someone to attack you for posting something like that. I'm not apologizing. I don't want to be in the business of apologizing for people attacking you.
You're good. I definitely knew when I posted that there is a very high likelihood people aren't going to like it, and that is a difficulty that comes in following Christ. In that you have to do things people will not like because sometimes they just the truth is not convenient. And again, I bring up younger life because
but there's a truth and then there's a truth. I mean, and part of it is when you post that, if I'm walking around thinking of myself as a pro-choice person and I see it, I go, look, I'm not Genghis Khan and I'm not Hitler, man.
Well,
like my participation in the group of people who murders people by thinking of myself as a pro-choice person the ticket that I bought for saying that I was pro-choice didn't include going to Hitler and Genghis Khan land.
Well, and
if you know what I mean.
We don't recognize in our contemporary society the banality of evil. Evil doesn't look like a devil with a pitchfork and horns and cloven hooves smiling and laughing and burping and deep voices at you in order to scare the hell out of you so that you're scared. No. Evil looks like somebody who's beautiful with pretty eyes that says everything you want to hear and makes you feel so great, but there's just something not quite right about it. In Soviet Russia, in North Korea, in China, in Colombia, in Cuba, what you have is these regimes that employ a bureaucracy, and individually the people in the bureaucracy don't do their work with the idea that they're killing people or that they're promoting a fascist regime. They do their work with the idea, I need to make my bread so I can go home and feed my family.
No, yeah, I mean, and I agree with you and Hannah Arendt when you make that point.
Yeah, so the evil in abortion that transcends, and it's like Genghis Khan, etc., isn't from the individuals who believe in it. It's from the top down, where the deception comes that this activity is morally justifiable. And that is every bit as bad as all the atrocities in history, because it requires people to be deliberately deceived in order for that ideology to prosper.
Well, I see, and this is what I disagreed with what we got into a little bit on the Facebook thread as well, is that position is inherently, I think, condescending to people who do hold pro-choice views, only because it assumes that their views are misguided readily at the beginning.
Yeah,
there cannot be a good argument for pro-choice from the beginning.
I agree, and that's one of the reasons I make the argument. And I know this people aren't going to like this, and I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but I understand that I may. So I'm trying to do it as gently as I can. But my perspective on this is that pro-choice itself is so fundamentally flawed that is the reality, and unless you tell people, they can't face it and even think about it. I think the best way to face it is to look at it and get mad and then really think about it for a minute and see whether or not I'm spouting, unrighteous hate, or I'm just presenting an uncomfortable truth.
Well, in your defense, that's kind of what we're doing now, so I guess it's worked.
Yeah,
it's worked a little bit.
You have got to be one of the most open-minded folks I've talked to about this, and I really appreciate it. There's very few. What will happen is about 1 in 50 people that I talk to about this will be really open to having a discussion and exploring both sides of the perspective reasonably and civilly. But the other people, and I've been these people, get emotionally respondent, and instead of looking into it, they just go off. And I've done it, and I try not to, and I probably will in the future. But that's just part of the human condition. You got to try and Yeah.
Well, I mean, I completely understand that. Facebook especially is the fertile ground for that type of thing because of how intimate a space it is for someone in their own life. I mean, they think that everyone who interacts with Facebook thinks they own it, and so
it's true.
And everybody I think is looking for an opportunity to feel righteously angry at something. It reinforces their identity. And I think part of the issue is with things like this is that, there's an in-group and an out-group. There's the pro-life group who sees something like this and goes, yes, that's correct. I agree with that. And messages like this in those groups, I think, serve to reinforce an identity, not in a bad way, but in a group identity. It's it reinforces someone's sense of self within that group and organization, and what they believe, and provides more
either side of the fence too. Because
no, I totally agree. Yeah, it happens both sides, absolutely. Yeah. And then a message like that is meant for an in group that ends up going to an out group can become really, really inflammatory in a way that it was maybe never meant to.
Well, it wasn't meant to be inflammatory, but it wasn't meant for an in-group either. The truth is inconvenient to anybody who's not in the truth. I mean, C.S. Lewis writes about how his book, Mere Christianity, is going to piss off the people who don't think it's far enough left, and it's going to piss off the people who don't think it's far enough right. Because when you get too far in both directions, if you're too far liberal or you too far conservative, eventually they end up overlapping. They become the same thing.
Hashtag haters gonna hate.
There you go. That's right. And so it's not meant to be inflammatory, but it's not meant for an in-group. What it's meant to be is a quick factoid that very simply communicates.
It's provocative.
A provocative truth. And I think we need to discuss these things because the educational institution isn't anymore. It's disgusting.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that might be the case. We discussed. I grew up with a great philosophical education in Metro Detroit, which was maybe abnormal. I admit.
Mine is abnormal as well. Otherwise, if we weren't abnormal, we wouldn't be taking the time to really look into the meat of this.
Oh God, I'm so glad I'm not normal. But there's two things that you said that I want to bring back up here. As you said, this is a truth. It's a little factoid that's speaking some truth. Part of this also is I said that this is why your position is potentially inherently condescending, and people don't like. I mean, people don't like being condescended to, and I think that's part of why I was like, this doesn't feel like an effective tool to encourage discussion. But one, and then two is that I think it is arrogant to think that you have that truth. And I mean, so I'm grew up in the church and no longer a believer. I'm the way toward the Christian God that you probably are to.
Well, and that's understandable.
Zeus or Odin.
But
hold on, I want to make this point real quick. But having said that, one of the things that I do respect is a lot of Christian theology that comes through the existentialism branch of philosophy, such as Soren Kierkegaard, who builds into the idea that there's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of doubt. And part of what I think is inherently frustrating about dealing with a lot of, I don't want to say a lot. I don't want to lump everybody into this category, but dealing sometimes with pro-lifers is that there is an arrogance to the position where it's like, well, has been revealed to us that this is incorrect. It's a bad way abortion is wrong, and there's no other way around it, and no good argument can be made for it. And it feels like you're sealed off from entering, and it's almost like you have to admit or give up this idea that you have any of the things that you hold onto are valuable in the beginning.
Well, ask yourself, are there other perspectives that have been embraced by society which later turned out to be wrong like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would agree with that.
So the question
completely.
is, where is the truth in it? That's what matters. Is there a truth to this issue, or is there no truth to it? Now, here's what C.S. Lewis says in his novel, That Hideous Strength, which if you haven't read it, you should. It's an excellent read. It'll blow the back off your head. I've read it 4 or 5 times. Just get through the first 100 pages because they're extremely boring, but after that you can't.
What is the name of the book again?
That Hideous Strength. It reads like a mix of Narnia and 1984. It's pretty good. It's got Merlin in it and stuff. It's a great book. But here's a quote from that book where a character named Blizzard, he's talking to a young guy, and the young guy says, "Well, that's your view," and he responds, "There are a dozen views about everything until you know the answer. Then there's never more than one." And that is that's very true. Now, I may be wrong about the abortion issue, but whether or not I am, there's a truth. There's an answer to that issue out there somewhere. And so in order to arrive at that answer, I want to look at things as objectively as I can. So I pulled up a site here. You can type this in just if you go into Google and type in number of worldwide abortions since 1973. The first stat that pops up is probably biased in the Christian perspective, but it says 1.72 billion abortions worldwide. Now, let's cut off the 0.72. Let's just call it a billion because I think that'll get rid of the bias. Still, 1 out of 7, because there's only about 7 billion people on the planet, being killed for convenience sake, that is a global phenomenon, and that definitely influences worldwide economy. Now, if that's what's going on in the world, if we're killing 1 out of 7 of the people that are born just because we decide that they have no right to life, there's something wrong with that. And that's the issue isn't just America. Not only is it in America, but you also have American taxes being sent overseas to fund this kind of stuff. That's one of the reasons there's such a hue and cry about the Obamacare legislation, because there's IRS provisions to funnel taxes from Joe Blow taxpayer into Planned Parenthood shenaniganery overseas. I love that word I've coined.
Shenaniganery?
Shenaniganery. That ain't a real word, but I like to say it. So that's, one of the reasons you have what is perceived as arrogance is because people are looking at this and they've got to defend against the pro-choice perspective, or they've got to defend the pro-choice perspective. And the deeper you go into it, the more frightening it becomes, especially when you consider the role of abortion in occultic ideology. And that's some pretty crazy stuff if you want to get into that.
Yeah, let's table that for a moment.
Okay.
I mean, because that's a rabbit hole we won't get back out of probably.
We'll go down into one, and if we go that way, we'll end up in Luciferianism and Nephilim and you name it. It'll go crazy.
Yeah, all that stuff. So here's, I think this is interesting. I look at a number like that. One, I find that almost unbelievable.
So do I. That's why I cut off.
Or completely unbelievable.
That's why I cut off the 0.72.
Yeah.
Because
well, I'm glad I'm glad we've got a 720 million abortion margin there.
Right,
but,
right. You see,
but,
I mean, well, but I mean, even if it's half that, that's still, that's too many.
well, I don't know, because I hear a number like that and I think, look, I feel no moral weight to that necessarily whatsoever. Now, again, I mean, I could agree with you potentially that something like partial birth abortion is absolutely abhorrent and maybe should not exist. But when I hear a number like 1 billion abortions, I think, well, look, these are, like I said before, potentially blastocysts, potentially fetuses that haven't developed.
Well, and see, there you go. You've got to dehumanize it in order to make it palatable.
Well, because I don't know that it's human necessarily. I mean, that's what this debate would have to become, is a semantic debate on what constitutes human. Because look, I mean, your belief that essentially humanness begins at conception is different from the religious belief that a Muslim has that
right.
that 120 days into pregnancy is when a soul ends up entering the body. So there's no problem with aborting fetuses in the first 120 days if you're a Muslim. There's no issue.
The question is, there definitely is a reality, regardless of either of our perspective, to this issue. There is a truth. Where is that truth? Is that truth in that souls are not required to meet some standard of age or maturity, or is that truth that the universe is sort of set up in a rule manner that makes no sense? That you
Well, and I mean, and this is, I guess, maybe another root of this fundamental disagreement. There is a third option, which is that the concept of truth is an illusion to begin with. I mean, we can lingually talk about what truth might be, but what I look at is as I see it in a
philosophical red herring, though, because you can't really even have a discussion unless both of you have a standpoint that you believe to be absolutely true. Whether or not it is absolutely true exists outside of either of you. But the fact that there is reality indicates said reality has a source, i.e. a creator. So the truth.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that I've heard, the Kalam and different versions of sort of the argument from creation. Who's the guy I'm thinking of? A Critique of Pure Kant. Even Kant would potentially disagree with you that creation implies a creator.
But Descartes actually, though people vet him as atheist, he was actually wrote his philosophical works to prove the existence of a creator. And if you read,
you know what? Descartes' a fucking asshole. No, I'm just joking. He owes me $5 and he's a piece of shit. That guy. Pardon my French.
That's funny. I got one like that. The reason I think Nietzsche hated language is because his own name's so fucking hard to spell. Nietzsche. What the? You need an N, an E, and a chi. That's it.
That's pretty funny. Yeah. Unsurprising to you, Nietzsche is one of my favorite philosophers.
Well, Nietzsche has a lot of great ideas, but I think he was subject to the influence of that sister of his, and she got him into a sort of, a German version of Thelema called Zoroastrianism, which is the same sort of perspective up and repackaged so that he liked it. I think the poor guy got spun off the rails by that influence. He wrote some good things, but then he went a little nuts, in my opinion.
Well, he did go. He went nuts literally. So I mean, your opinion is factually grounded. But getting back to sort of where we were at, I think the concept of truth is fascinating because I could agree potentially. So I could agree that there is an idea of humanness, but I mean metaphysically, where and how does that exist? I mean, those are two important questions that I feel like we are entering an era in which we will have to answer, and that answer could pragmatically take 3 or 4 or 5 different ways to answer it. I mean,
it could. I think people overcomplicate the concept of consciousness, though. I was watching a speaker. Now, I'll give you the pedigree on this guy. I posted on him.
Because I mean, and this is a good point. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to draw attention, if anybody's listening, to why I think you're potentially bringing this up and why this is important, because that when does that consciousness occur? Because it could very well be that a human being, meaning a human body with a brain that's non-functioning and doesn't have consciousness, could not constitute what we would call humanness. But at some point in the future, it could exist in a computer and not have a body. And unplugging that computer could be tantamount to murdering the person who has a consciousness inside of it. I just want to draw attention to that. But
That's a good point. I hadn't even looked at it that way. No, where I was going to say is that there's a difference between what constitutes humanity and consciousness, and we need to define what consciousness is. For the reason that if you define humanity as consciousness, then you've got to kill all the people who have mental retardation that prevents them from having the same level of consciousness we do. So there's different levels of consciousness. And what human consciousness is the ability to, I think, arrive at truth based on present understanding, present awareness of your surroundings. I think that's the easiest way to define what we would call human consciousness. But I don't think that defines humanity, because there are definitely people. I'm a substitute. I deal with kids who are in a wheelchair and never learned to walk or talk in their whole lives. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Those kids don't have the same level of consciousness. They have a level of consciousness, but it's not the same as somebody whose brain is functioning normally. So to apply the level of consciousness as a factor in delineating whether or not someone is or isn't human is, I think, to take the wrong tack, because there's obvious examples where people don't have consciousness, but they're definitely human. So the problem with defining humanity by size and intelligence is that you have people outside the womb of all sizes and intelligence who, under those definitions, may or may not be human. The definition of humanity has to do then with the whole package. You've got to look at the sapling to the redwood. You've got to look at the bigger picture. Are we here without any design? Are we here as a random happenstance of unguided events eventually making life accidentally? Or have we been put here for a specific reason? And the answer to that question defines whether or not someone is or isn't human from a number of different ways. So if you're coming from the random perspective, then your contention of blastocysts and fetuses has some grounding in reality. But reality demonstrates that the supernatural exists, and the current cosmology doesn't account for that.
I don't know, man. I think that David Hume would beg to differ with that claim.
Hundreds of thousands of people beg to differ.
But hey, I want to draw attention to the fact that I appreciate you acknowledging that having that different conception of the universe would legitimize a pro-choice position.
And that's why apologetics and the nature of existence is such a very fundamental thing to talk about, because how we define who we are defines how we treat other people and whether or not we treat them good or less than human. I mean, if you look at a perspective that says we're evolving, then it is morally correct for the strong to triumph over the weak.
Well, I don't know if I'd say it's morally correct, but there's no moral
if that doesn't happen,
impingement.
Survive.
Well, what's going to happen? Well, I think the conception, your conception or explanation of evolution and the moral nature of the survival of the fittest or the strongest survive is predicated on the idea that there is a kind of successfulness or a successmanship, if those words exist, for evolving. But the reality is that we are evolving. I mean, that just happens.
Well,
so there's necessarily. Go ahead.
I would say, looking at current society and the world over, human beings would empirically demonstrate devolution much easier than evolution.
Well, there's no de-evolution is the idea of de-evolution is, I mean, predicated on the concept that there's a sort of a linear up or down, positive or negative quality. And what evolution is just a moving of genetic information and variety through time as time advances. So
that's how
it just happens. It's just happening. It doesn't happen with any moral quality to it.
Set behind it, but that's not what reality's evidence bears out. Because when you shuffle around genetic information in the genome, you're not actually adding new information. It'd be the same thing as taking a book and rearranging the letters inside. You haven't added any new letters or any new words, and most of the time, if you do that randomly, you're just going to get gibberish. So that reshuffling of information doesn't actually contribute to a species getting more genetic information and developing that way, which is necessary from molecules to man evolution. it actually degenerates. It's like a Xerox machine. If you copy a copy of a copy, eventually you can't see it. And essentially, from the perspective of the creationist, Adam and Eve were the initial copies, and it's amazing that we function at all based on the Xerox errors, if you will, over the last 6,000 or so years.
I can almost feel Richard Dawkins screeching listening to that explanation.
He hears that and gets a hemorrhoid. Hey, I've been there, man. You get angry enough, your emotional state, the spirit you're in, will affect your physical body. That's been proven.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Yeah, no doubt.
I get me some tucks. It's no fun. But the idea, when we look at fundamentally where human beings come from, what their arc is, it's important to consider that if you do take the survival of the fittest mentality, then you're taking the mentality that human beings exist for no reason other than entropy. And
yeah, I would agree with that.
Then where is morality in that? There can't be any wrong because it's all subjective.
Well, yeah, I actually would agree with that. I think I can almost hear William Lane Craig speaking exactly the arguments you're talking about.
Well, and that's the thing, because
which is not, by the way, I should say, that is not me being insulting. He's a smart man. So.
Oh no, I've seen one or two of his debates. It's not that I don't understand this perspective. I've rejected the perspective of non-causal existence because it doesn't match with my understanding of the present truth that I am able to perceive on the daily basis. I see that everything is interconnected. I see when I do one thing morally positive or negative, there is always a response, just like with every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So in studying that, I've studied this guy who's an ex-Satanist. He's pretty ridiculous. He made that definition of consciousness, and that's what I was bringing up earlier. Sure. And what I've grown to think, what I've come to think from Scripture, etc., is that there is a physics to morality in the same way there's a physics to reality, and that modern science intentionally ignores this because it rejects the idea of there being a morality, that you reap what you sow, that what goes around comes around. But unfortunately, if you get out of the textbooks and look at real life, that principle is evident to everybody, whether or not you agree with it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that my perspective, and we're running out of time here in a little bit.
Yeah,
but
it's 5. Wow, time's fun when you're having flies.
I know, right? Time's fun when you're having flies.
That's what the bullfrog said.
Next time my dad ties flies, I'm going to have to tell that to him.
Do it.
So, well, what I was going to say here, I think, is that my perspective on this is exactly that there is, the concept of morality is created spontaneously, or rather implicitly by human beings, that there is an evolutionary reason it was beneficial to have an idea of morality. People who did have that implicit in their hardware, so to speak, in the brain, were more successful than those who didn't. It was really simple.
And if that's the case, then Genghis Khan was not immoral, and Nazi Germany weren't either. And so,
yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that a little bit, and with the caveat that I think that there are two levels to there's a capital M morality, and then there's a little lowercase m morality. And I would say that to people like you and me, we would disagree. Both of us would disagree with the actions of Genghis Khan and of course the Holocaust. And I think that we wouldn't want to live in a world.
Neither of those people are right or wrong.
They're not right or wrong. I would say they're not right or wrong from a cosmological standpoint of a creator deity or from
I'd say if you're gonna bring in the creator, they have to be wrong. The only way to say they're not wrong is to exclude the idea of a cosmic deity.
Well, I would say so that's why I'm saying that I don't think that they're wrong in the sense that there's nothing that held that their actions would be or were bad in a metaphysical way. What I'm saying is that you and I could both look at that and go, yeah, that's wrong. I wouldn't want to live in a world that encourages that type of behavior.
Well,
so let's discourage it.
From that perspective, what I posted isn't inflammatory at all, because you've acknowledged that since there is no right and wrong, those facts of those deaths, 11 million, 40 million, 61 million, are just entirely subjective, so there's no reason to have any ire. But yet there is. See, people's response to reality proves
Yeah.
that there is a morality. It's just we don't want to admit it.
Well, I mean, I would say there's a morality, but that morality is a human creation. In the same way that, let me put it this way. In the same way that numbers are a human creation, that is, numbers and letters are creations of mankind, but mathematics exists in the universe. What I'm saying is that morality does not exist in the universe. We've created it by creating numbers, and then in the opposite way that mathematics exists. It's almost like we've created the numbers first, and then we're saying math exists, rather than math existing and us discovering it and using numbers to try and communicate it.
The existence of math disproves an irrational random universe. And you're right, math exists apart from our interpretation of it. But that it exists at all demonstrates a created universe, because it does exist apart from humankind, and randomness could not have brought the elegance of mathematics to existence.
I don't know. There are physicists who would disagree with that. I mean, I would be inclined to agree that there is an. I would be inclined to agree that there is an order, but go ahead.
Most people who understand math they come to realize there is cosmic mathematics outside human beings. For example, the Fibonacci sequence is seen everywhere, from natural life to the configuration of stars in the sky at night. Outside of that, you've got fractals, which are endlessly repetitive and whose mathematical intricacy couldn't even be discovered until we came up with the computers. But those fractals existed before mankind did. They were still there, and yet they're so intricately designed they couldn't possibly be randomness. 3.14, the number of pi, goes on infinitely, yet it describes a finite circle. That circle doesn't go on infinitely, but that number does. Mathematics are an expression that there is a reality which exists superior to this one, and our world conforms to that. And morality, part of the natural law, like mathematics, does in fact define what is and isn't right, or you're not able to say that anything the Nazis did was wrong.
Well, that's certainly a good argument, I have to admit. I think I agree with Kant that the design does not imply a designer necessarily. And although I cannot answer that question of where did that come from, I do think that the process of scientific investigation probably will, in time, reveal better answers to that question. But this is probably the first time anybody has ever said this, which is that in order to really get to the bottom of this, we need to get a mathematician over here.
Well, there's mathematicians that will argue both sides of that, but you'll find the majority of mathematics folks who really get into it, believe it or not, they end up in some way being deist or creationist. They don't necessarily fall into a religious discipline, but most math leads people to believe there is a creator for whatever reason. Now, whether or not that's indicative of anything, I couldn't tell you. I just know that that's a statistical reality to the field of mathematics.
Well, you know what, Kevin, we've been talking for an hour, man, and I would love to keep this going. I know, but unfortunately, I've got a limit to what I can post on YouTube and on SoundCloud. And I've got to actually run out to go to CrossFit here in a little bit, so I'm going to have to let it go. But hey, man, I want to tell you again, thank you very much for taking the time to meet and being open to, I mean, I should point this out, we are not really friends. I mean, we're barely Facebook friends, and we haven't really had much interaction on Facebook for Kevin to know that I wasn't going to, he wasn't walking into an alligator trap or something. So I really want to just extend that gratitude and appreciation for you meeting and opening yourself up in your beliefs for what essentially is a stranger and a stranger's audience to learn about what you think and maybe consider some of those positions for themselves. And I really am glad that we can do that together here to encourage an atmosphere of that kind of thing, hopefully more and more on the internet.
Well, sir, I really appreciate your perspective and attitude, and I think you're doing a great job. I hope you keep at it. I hope you keep doing this because our nation needs it. Whether or not you agree with me, I don't care. We have the discussion, and that's intellectual. It's stimulating. It's good for everybody. So God bless you for doing this. Keep at it, and hopefully I'll run into you sometime when I'm out there near Detroit.
Yeah, maybe man. Keep telling those jokes. Yeah. If you want to get hooked up with some connections I have at churches, believe it or not, because I know you do I know you do
Yeah.
stand up for congregations and things like this. You just reach out on Facebook. I'm happy to connect you. I know some of the people at some very large churches in Metro Detroit, because I sometimes go to church services, even though I'm not really a believer. So, I try to keep myself open. I really do. And I appreciate that you noticed that earlier.
Very well. That's good. And you know what? Nobody who closes their mind can learn anything. That's for either side. The folks who are out there in Montana with their guns getting pissed at black people, they're not doing any good for anybody either. So,
especially those black people.
Yeah. You gotta keep your mind open. We're all family. We're all human beings we're like brothers and sisters that have been away for a while. We got to treat each other like that, not like hateful, spiteful entities. So I appreciate what you're doing. I hope you keep doing it, and I am probably going to talk to you on Facebook about some of those connections. I'd love to come out there and do some comedy.
Perfect, man. Well, we'll end this before we start playing Kumbaya and holding hands. So take care, man. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks everybody for listening.
Absolutely. Au revoir.
Bye.
Bye.